Hello, everybody. Thank you so much, Massachusetts Conference for Women, for tuning in with us today. I am Miranda Wicker, the social media director for the Conferences for Women, and I am here with Dominique Brewer, the talent acquisition leader for Takeda Pharmaceuticals. Dominique, thank you so much for taking time to be with us this afternoon.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so honored to be here. I'm very excited to connect with everyone.
So tell us a little bit about yourself, what you do, what you loved about the what your favorite thing was about the conference yesterday, what you're looking forward to. Just give us a little bit of who you are and what you're up to.
Yeah, so thank you for that. I am one of the talent acquisition leaders at Takeda. Currently, I oversee or oversaw until this past Monday, U.S. and global commercial recruiting activities. Now moving into a diversity, equity, and inclusion role, still focused on TA, HR, workforce strategies. So I've been with Takeda for 4.5 years. Prior to joining Takeda, was at Price Waterhouse, worked as a headhunter in financial services before moving into pharma. What I have enjoyed the most about the conference is just all of the amazing women, allies, mentor sponsors that have been presenting here, connecting. It's been so amazing to see people's engagement, to hear the content that's really dedicated and focused on how do we navigate through life, but especially in this uncharted time. And so I will tell you, not one thing that I've seen, not one presenter that I've watched has not been amazing, and it's been the best conference I've been to all year. So kudos to you and the team for that.
Well, thank you. I gave our programming team just major kudos in our wrap-up call last night, because I think yesterday's conference, I can't wait to just spend some time this weekend with like coffee or hot chocolate and watching so many incredible breakout sessions. So I'm super pumped to just get to digest it all.
That's a great,
I
great
saw so many people's comments coming through yesterday, and I'm just really ready to get to experience it for myself, without monitoring and sharing on social, and just get to take it all in. So we've been doing these Ask the Recruiter series videos for a couple of months now, and I'm really excited to ask you some of these questions today, because it's always interesting to me to think about, how every recruiter we ask, we're asking different questions of everybody, but when we ask similar questions, everybody has a different answer. So I'm interested to see what your take is going to be on some of these similar questions that we've been asking. And if you are watching this right now in our Six Connects platform and you have questions for Dominique, then please feel free to drop them into the chat, and then we will get them over for a Q&A portion that will take place in just a little bit. So again, go ahead and share your questions with us, and we will take a minute to answer them in a little bit. So right now, it's an unprecedented time especially for women in employment, in the workforce. I think, what was the figure in September? 860,000 women left the workforce.
Yeah.
So one question that has come up is, if you have a steady job in this current economy, where we know that women are leaving the workforce en masse, where it can be difficult to find a new job, a new career, is it too risky to change jobs right now? I mean, you're going through a job change yourself, although it's lateral and it's with the same company, but is right now a risky time?
Actually, so that's a great question. And we have this pandemic. It's unprecedented. Just times in general are like nothing we've ever seen. But to your point, all of the data shows, no matter how we look at it, race, age, sector, income, women are most disproportionately affected by the current state of affairs. I think actually it's a really good time to give yourself some grace to evaluate what's out there and start to really think about where you are currently, and have more informal opportunities to network if you're not in a position where you're having to leave your current employer for whatever reason. If you are in a position where you're searching for a job, then also the opportunity to informally network is by far the greatest opportunity that we've seen, because everyone is taking a moment to pause, breathe, and reach out and try to help someone else. And so it could be a really great opportunity to assess what else is happening in the company outside of what are your day-to-day responsibilities and what do those look like. So as we're thinking about all of the roles that we have as women, partner, spouse, caregiver, parent, friend, sister, aunt. There's a lot that's going on there. And I think that we haven't really had a chance to kind of stop and assess how these things, how our jobs impact us. And that could be an opportunity to look at a job from that perspective and really hear from other people that are all going through the same thing, different perspectives that you haven't been able to inquire of before. The other thing is we're all virtually onboarding if you're looking to change a job or if you're changing within your existing organization. And so while onboarding virtually and not having one-to-one connections can be scary for a lot of us, it also gives us another opportunity to make connections that we otherwise might not have been able to make, or it might have taken a longer time to actually get to. And so there could be a lot of positive outcome by looking for a job right now during this time, and people that are willing to have conversations that might have otherwise been unattainable if we were in normal circumstances.
So what I'm hearing you say is it's never too risky to at least have the conversations.
Never too risky. It's always good to put feelers out there and make sure that you have some irons in the fire.
All right. So you mentioned, Ashton Applewhite has spoken at one of our conferences before, and I'm not sure if you're familiar with her, but she talks a lot about gender discrimination, particularly in the workplace, and particularly in as older women in particular are pushed out of the workforce. And so then this is another sort of facet that is always interesting to me is mothers who have a gap in their career history who want to come back into the workforce, or people who leave the workforce for caregiving, or, maybe as we're looking next year or a year or two and ahead, people who've left the workforce right now who are going to want to come back in. So this next question is, what's your advice on when you're building out your resume for a job, how far back should your resume go? When actually, you know what? I'm going to apologize because I have gotten ahead of myself with my questions. Okay. We're going to go back to this. This is what I'm going for. How do you edit your resume so that you're not discriminated against based on your age when you're trying to re-enter the workforce?
Yeah. So I think removing the date of the year that you graduated is absolutely acceptable. I mean, if you have not graduated in the last 3 to 5 years, it's kind of a moot point anyway, right? People should be hiring you for the skills that you have, the competencies that you're able to demonstrate, and the work that you're going to be able to do in the position you're being evaluated for. And so removing the year and your GPA, quite frankly, if you're not a new graduate, then there's really not a reason to disclose your GPA if it was 10 or 15 years ago, unless it's just so important to you as an individual. But I think one of the things that we're all starting to realize is there is this affinity bias that people have. And how can we get around putting that out there, because it might prevent us from having an opportunity to have a discussion. So there's nothing wrong with removing the year of graduation or GPA from your resume. And as you're building out your resume, if you have a lot of experience and you're trying to, Google has so many recommendations around what good looks like, right? So if you're trying to figure out a way to really share all of the work that you've done, you can also think about highlighting it from a cross-functional competency perspective instead of presenting 30 years of experience in your CV, right? So if it's maybe 15 years outdated, maybe that's highlighted in the summary of your skills versus listing out those prior 15 years of experiences.
Because that is really so much data to try and put on 1 or 2 sheets of paper when you're talking about, having 20, even me, like let's see, gosh, when did I enter the workforce? As a professional post-college, I'm not going to say, it's been like 20 years now, which is insane to me to think about. It's just nuts. But that's still a lot of information to try and put on 1 sheet of paper. So then that nicely ties into the next question, which is, how far back do you go when you want to demonstrate that diversity of skills? And you talked about displaying cross-functionality of skill sets. So can you talk just a little bit about that?
Absolutely. So I will use myself as an example. I started off my career in the financial services industry before I transitioned into being a headhunter for the financial services industry. And so for a period of time, when I graduated school, that experience does not directly tie into the roles that I'm looking for right now, especially I've transitioned industries again into pharma. So I have 2004 and prior to experience within marketing, training, and product development for the financial services industry. But when it comes to the highlight of what I've done at the top of my CV, then it highlights some of the other broader skills that have transcended the industries that I've worked in, like change management, product development, training, CL&D activities. So I don't have to go into 4 positions that happened 15 years ago on an individual basis that also could play into how someone might be receiving my CV or feeling that it was so long ago, it might be too outdated, right? So it helps to keep everything relevant and position it at the top where it's important for someone to have that visibility and know that you've done it before. You know, working is like riding a bike. As long as you've continued in your career, you'll be able to pick back up pretty quickly. And everyone needs some support when they're transitioning jobs or starting a new company. So it's really just, how do we do it here? And what do we need to do to move forward?
Well, and I think one of the things that you're talking about here also goes into this idea that, you know, when we're transitioning from one industry to another, you're talking about cross-functional skills. So that's one of the questions that we love to ask our recruiters is, how do we demonstrate those skills from one industry to another? And then in the verbal interview, maybe how do we communicate those transferable skills to our potential employers when you're actually in the interview, not just necessarily on the piece of paper?
Absolutely. So I like to talk about, you know, when you Google, they're like behavioral interviews and how do you get prepared for this? And I like to highlight it like you're telling a story. So you don't just start with, this is how it started and the end. There are these things that happen to get to that end state. And so setting the context of what you've done and then going about how you did it to demonstrate an outcome, and then how you've been able to take those learning experiences to transition throughout the rest of your time as a professional. One of the things that I hear pretty frequently, especially for people that are interviewing, is it's so hard to actually tell someone, even people I might be working with currently, what I do, because they're just used to seeing me in this light. And so if you think about telling that story about what you've done, why you've done it, and how this would be beneficial for the role that you're working in, then that's how you convey not just your experiences, but also how you would add value to that team and that position at that company.
All right, so changing gears just a little bit, we're going to talk about leadership skills, and then we're going to get into some audience questions. So one of the questions that we have is, you know, maybe you're looking to move into management and maybe you've only had small experience with managing teams of 1 or 2 people. Mm-hmm. So how do you demonstrate leadership skills? Maybe you're going for a job where it is a much larger, it's a more significantly responsible position for leadership. So how do you demonstrate that you can translate that skill of managing 1 or 2 people on a team to managing teams of 10 or 20?
So that's a great question. And I think it's one that sometimes we have an invisible barrier in our own mind around, I haven't done this, and so I may not be able to or deemed capable of doing that.
And this is especially true of women, right? What's the stat that women will only apply for a job if they check 10 out of 10 of the boxes, and then will apply for a job if they check 3 out of 10?
Yes, and the reality is no one's perfect. Even the best person is not perfect. We all have things that we're working toward and working through, and everyone makes mistakes. So ladies, let's give ourselves some grace and knowing that you're never going to fit someone else's perception of what perfect looks like or your own. So give yourself some grace in that. I like to highlight the cross-functional partnerships that you have, right? So if you're only managing 1 or 2 people, that's fine. Every person is at a different place. To support someone, and best managers have people that are able to demonstrate growth, have opportunity. So you've mentored people, you've helped develop those individuals. You've worked across functions to do your job. The reality is we're not operating in silos in life. And so there's a lot of things that you're doing that can demonstrate that you're able to build relationships, to take initiative and learn other areas to have better outcomes by demonstrating those things as you're talking about the new position that you're looking in. You know, those traits are things that everyone doesn't have, and they're not just readily available in the marketplace. That will help present you as someone that's able to do these things, and then people will give you the opportunity to move into that leadership position. Those traits are more valuable for employers than just having sat in the seat.
All right, so let's get into some audience questions. So again, if you have these questions, continue to drop them in the chat, and then we are getting them over here for Dominique. So here's one that that I think is pretty cool, and I have some ideas on this one too, but I'm interested to hear what you say. So how do we stand out as an applicant? You know, you've got a stack of resumes on your desk, and how do I make mine stand out? How do I make my resume rise to the top of that stack?
Yeah, so that's a great question, especially because the first thing that reviews your resume is an ATS system, which is an applicant tracking system, and it looks for keywords. And then it comes onto the desk of the recruiter. And so as you're thinking about building your resume and you have a job description that you're looking at, I always tell people, if there's 10 people on your team that are all doing the same thing, how are you doing or being the differentiator between those other team members? So really looking to add quality of the interactions that you have, talking about the visibility or cross-functional partnerships that you have within the organization, and how you've added value, especially if you're doing project-based work. Those things are the things that will stand out to the recruiter, whether or not they have a lot of understanding of the subject matter area that they're recruiting for, and also to the hiring manager. So really how you can demonstrate the value that you're adding instead of using that checklist of accountabilities that comes on the job description that you might have applied for.
So what you're saying is it doesn't actually matter how pretty your resume is.
No, actually, it doesn't. It's really the content. So, and also I would recommend keeping in mind that people think differently than computers do. So as you're thinking about title and language, make sure that you're spelling things out, right? If I put RN or GI because I'm working in the gastro space, well, GI from a computer system could mean the Army. Actually, if you Google it, that's the first thing that comes up, GI Bill. So make sure that you're spelling things out in terms of the real world, given that every company titles things differently as well. So you want to make sure that people aren't having to question whether or not you have the direct experience, but it's highlighted specifically someplace on your resume. And then you can use the shortened version.
That is an exceptional tip. And that is actually the first time, and I've been doing these Ask the Recruiter sessions for 3 months. And that's the very first time that I've heard that tip. So now I'm like, not that I've got 2 kids at home that I'm homeschooling through a pandemic, and I have a job that I love. And so I'm not looking, but now I'm like, do I have any abbreviations on my resume that I need to go spell out? That's a really great tip, because people think, let me save space because I have so much that I need to say, but it really is important to spell out those words.
The other thing, Miranda, if I can just really quickly, because you said, please, how can I stand out, is that don't limit yourself to just that online application. Your resume and your LinkedIn profile are living, breathing documents. And so make sure you're leveraging both of those, and then leveraging your network to start making connections at those organizations that may also be able to sponsor and advocate for you as you go through the online application process. It is one of the most frustrating points of candidates to have to apply for a job and never have a call back. So by doing these things, it can further help supplement your resume alone.
So speaking of callbacks, this is related. How long do you wait before a follow-up after an interview, especially during a holiday month like November or December?
That's a really great question. And I think that one of the major things that I would strongly recommend is taking the time to connect with your recruiting partner, throughout the process, because they're going to be your biggest advocate, especially with a lot of the hiring managers and other stakeholders that are participating in the interview panel, potentially being out for the holiday season and after the start of the new year, because we are in uncharted times. So people are all trying to find ways to get time with their family, and there's just a lot of uncertainty. So if you can set the expectation of the recruiter to check in periodically and ask for updates, then it's not such a taboo question, or you're not feeling like I'm being over enthusiastic or not enthusiastic enough. And you can also reach out to them if you're not hearing anything back. If you've gone about that channel of being referred to an organization or having informational discussions with some of the panel members, then that's also another way to just politely reach out and say, hey, I'm still interested and would love an opportunity to just discuss any additional questions that you might have, given some time has passed since we connected. So I think that's another unique opportunity that we have right now that we may not have had pre-COVID.
Okay. So talking back again about that resume, is there a preference in which a summary is presented, third person or first?
Yeah, so that's a really great question. Unless you're a senior leader, we do not recommend writing summaries in third person. It's kind of like, if anyone remembers Richard Nixon, he used to say, Nixon. So it's really good to write in the first person narrative. If you're a leader that's managed sizable teams, then it's good to give an overview about what you're doing in the organization and your scope of position, but then to talk about you in first person so that people can make a connection with you and your leadership style and understand what they would potentially be signing up for should they work on your team. But everyone else, please try to stick to first person.
I used to teach, that was the hardest thing to teach. My background is in education, and I taught high school, and that was the hardest thing to teach, is because you're taught to teach. You're taught in college to teach them to write in third person. I'm like, this is really old. This is really antiquated. We should be letting people use I and talk about their feelings.
So many nuances, right? And Google is not always our friend in that instance. So.
No, it's not. No, it's not. So what's one of the differences? What's the difference between a CV and a resume? And when do you use one over the other? And what do you include in each?
It's kind of the same thing. It's all tomato. What are you gonna?
Just which one sounds fancier, curriculum vitae or resume?
Yeah. So it depends on the industry that you're working in, how it's titled. But as it relates to recruiting team and stakeholder, you're not going to lose any brownie points or have less consideration because you title it one or the other. Actually, one tip that I strongly recommend everyone does is when you're saving your resume, that you save it with your name instead of strings of things behind it, because that's how it's going to be located the best, and people tend to ask less questions if you just use your name and maybe the date of creation.
Well, and I was going to say, that's a tip that I can offer to this, is that I have strings of resumes as I've updated it over the years, as I've changed formats, or I've added this job, or I've taken this part off or added this. And so it's M. Wicker, January 2016, M. Wicker, April 2017. So anytime I've changed it, instead of changing over it or deleting old copies, I just save it with a new date and year, or month and year, so that I know, this is how it's changed. And then if I ever need to go back and reference something, it's always there.
Yes. Yeah. And I also would strongly recommend that you have more than one version of your resume, and be mindful of your objective. And I say mindful of your objective because if your goal is to be a social media liaison for the Massachusetts Conference for Women, but in your actual CV, it says that you want to lead a talent acquisition team, then it's not aligning and the person is likely going to move on. So having multiple versions is a good idea. And then making sure that you've modified your objective to be relative and specific to the position you're applying for will help tremendously as well.
Okay. So do recruiters really care about a cover letter?
So that is a subjective question, kind of like resumes. But what I will say is that cover letters sometimes help to convey the story of who you are, especially if you've transitioned industries. If there's things that you've done that are not appropriately shared on your resume, because again, the resume there's a different intent for the resume. It'll allow you to talk about why this company, why this opportunity, any diligence that you've done that makes you uniquely positioned to be considered for and or do that role. And so the people that care, which hopefully are most of the recruiters out there, do take the time to review those cover letters, and they will often reference them when they speak with you and before they speak with the hiring manager. So a good recruiter is always going to kind of make sure that they've gotten those nuggets of wisdoms from you so that they can advocate for you as a candidate. And that cover letter can help, speak for you before you have a chance to connect with someone live. So I would strongly recommend creating one.
I think this next question is going to be the answer to, do you need a cover letter? And the question, it won't all fit on one bubble, but it's, how do you get past the initial screen as an out-of-state candidate, especially if you'd like to secure a job before relocating? So this is the sort of information that you could put in a cover letter to say, I am relocating in spring of 2021, and maybe indicate, whether you would need a relocation package or you would not need a relocation package.
So I would say that my intention is to relocate by this time frame, but I wouldn't necessarily go into any detail about needs that you have, so that you're at least able to have a conversation and can learn what the company is going to offer. Right. And then also, if you are in a situation where you're trying to relocate, you can give yourself a little bit more grace because of the state of the United States and the globe. We're all having to be a little bit more lenient and agile around time frames for relocation. And so there can be greater opportunities over the next 6 to 9 months than we've seen historically as well. So I would stay away from anything around compensation expectations, because there's legalities around that, or needs as it relates to benefits until you've actually had a conversation, so that you're not eliminating yourself from the opportunity to have a discussion.
But it is safe to say I have plans to relocate to the area.
Absolutely.
And would appreciate the opportunity to interview for this position.
Absolutely.
All right. So that's why we use cover letters. So we did have a question, and I'm scrolling through our comments here. We had a question about salary that I wanted to go back to, but I don't think it's going to fit. Who do recruiters or companies typically choose between the perfect candidate who asks for a top of budget salary versus the candidates who are okay with a lower salary? If it's a case-by-case scenario, can you tell us what happened the last time you witnessed such a situation?
So that's a great question. And I will tell you, I think every company might take a slightly different approach. So at Takeda, we try to operate with our values front of mind, which Takeda is, and people are like, Japanese company, what is that? It's like kind of the golden rule, or we like to say the platinum rule. Don't just treat people how you think they would want to be treated, but how you would want to be treated. And so as we're having conversations, it really is looking at the position that's being offered. There are robust kind of reviews of equity, and we take everything on a case-by-case basis because there's so much information out there around pay equity, right? We're here talking about women and our plight to have better, be received, be accepted, be considered, be supported, and we're underpaid in a lot of situations. And so it is perfectly acceptable to ask a company, what is the compensation structure for this position? What are your bonus targets? What do the benefits look like? And then they'll ask you, what are your expectations for this role? So you can take some of the concern about, I've been underpaid, this is where I am right now, and really ask the recruiter to help you understand what a fair and equitable compensation package looks like for that position, so that you have the ability to negotiate a little bit more and hear from their perspective what that looks like. And then you can say, this either meets my expectations, is not enough, or we might need to be a little more creative because I'm expecting more. But either way, you're not removing yourself or being passed over because something is not aligned. So I think that's the best way to approach the negotiation discussion we've never let a candidate being out of range or underpaid. I mean, there's been situations where someone said, I want $85,000, and the market told us the job should pay $105,000. So the offer came at $105,000, right? But I think for people that may not be that fortunate, having the discussion with the recruiter around what is a fair and equitable compensation package for this position at your company look like will help you make a decision and go from there. Does that help with that question? I know that was loaded.
It wasn't. Well, I think it does, and I think it's one of those things where, you know, one of the things that recruiters keep coming back to in all of these conversations that we keep having, and one of the things that, you know, as I'm researching documents and articles to share across our social media channels, which go follow us at Mass Women all over the internet. One of the things that we keep coming back to is this idea that companies and brands and businesses right now are really looking more for who is the best fit for our company culture and who aligns with our brand values and with what we want to communicate to the world. Not just who's the smartest, who's the most capable, who's the biggest and best talent that there is in this field. It's who will most contribute to the team and the values that we as a company want to promote. And so I think that's the answer to the question, if I'm hearing correctly, is that
absolutely
Takeda, companies like Takeda are going to look for that employee who's the culture fit. So
it is that first. It is, how can you help us deliver on the mission to give better access to medicine for our patients? And so it's always going to be the best candidate that's able to help the group, the team, and the organization versus compensation. And the only other recommendation I would have is to keep the conversation about compensation with the recruiting team, so that you're not worried about how is my rapport with the hiring manager going into these things or these discussions. Should I actually be extended an offer, or would they have any concern about this? If you're having those conversations with the recruiting team, it gives you some cover to really have more transparent discussions, and they're supposed to be advocating for you in that process.
All right, so we are running over time here, but we still have a couple more questions. So I just want to wrap up with one, and then maybe you and we can offline just a little bit about ways that we can get a couple of answers to some of these questions, because they're, you know, still in our 6 Connects platform. So because I think they're valuable, but I don't know that we have time to get into them here in the time that we have allotted for this session today. But we do, everybody who's listening, if you've asked a question, we do want to work on finding an answer for you somehow. So thank you so much for asking.
Miranda, happy to connect with anyone that would like to connect on LinkedIn or a member of the team. We're always, you know, happy to help others and support people in this journey, because looking for a job, it impacts your livelihood. The work that you do impacts your ability to support yourself and your family. So it's really important, and I appreciate, again, the opportunity to have this discussion.
Well, that's what I was going to suggest, just maybe LinkedIn, or maybe if you have time and you want to pop in and share your LinkedIn profile. I don't know if people can find you in the conference attendee.
Yes, I do have a profile there.
Profile database, so they can find you, and then they can find you on LinkedIn and connect with you there. But, you know, leave you a note and say, hey, I watched your Ask the Recruiter session, had a couple of questions that I wanted to follow up on. But the last question that I want to end us with today is, you know, what are things I should work on myself when I'm currently employed and not planning to change jobs anytime soon? And the first one I'll say is, attend things like the Massachusetts Conference for Women. So good job. You did one. A little professional development there.
Yeah. You know, we at Takeda have this value system, and our United States business unit has translated that patient, trust, reputation, business into curious, connected, and courageous. And I think as women, we demonstrate those values every day, but we tend to take care of ourselves last, because there's so many other things that we have to do. And so a couple of things: don't limit yourself. There is a lot of opportunity, and we all need to give ourselves the grace to know that we are far more capable than we think we are. And there's other people that are not waiting to have 10 things lined up perfectly. They're figuring it out. We're already doing that. We're already figuring life out, and we're juggling a lot. And that authenticity is so valued, and it is what's going to help propel you in everything else that you do, right? Because people want to feel like I can identify with this individual, whether they're working next to you or they're reporting to you or you're reporting to them. And so just take the time to really have the reciprocity that's allowed right now with networking. Like Miranda, even us connecting, it's like there's so much that I can learn from and have conversation with you about, and we wouldn't have had that opportunity except for this. And so I think there's a lot that we can all offer to each other. Don't worry about reaching out and not knowing where to start. Just ask the questions. Give yourself some grace to say, hey, can we have a conversation? I see that you've done X, Y, and Z. I'd love to do that. Take some time to maybe connect with your leader that you're working with right now and share the things that you're doing. We're so busy with COVID. I feel like people have felt the need to get busier to show that they're doing more. And then we realize like, oh, people don't even know all of the work that I'm doing. And so through that, you can add much more value. You can create opportunities to have more visibility for yourself. And you can have that alignment that propels you with the in and or outside of your company. So take opportunities to network. Just kind of have an assessment or check-in with your leader. And then I would also say, think about sponsorship, mentorship, and support. There are 3 different things. You should have a sponsor, an ally, and a mentor. So if you don't have that, definitely start thinking and assessing in your network who can serve in those capacities for you. And I would have a professional and a personal system for both sets.
And I'm just going to throw out there the importance of self-care.
Yeah.
Taking a minute every day just to breathe. My self-care is that I read to myself every night before, like I read something every night before bed. It is my Zen moment. It's how I shut my brain off. It's how I have to do it. And I give myself that 15, 20 minutes every night before bed, because if I don't, then I'm a cranky disaster. But find ways, because you're right. We are so busy right now, and we are doing so much, and we are in such a pressure cooker with so much going on that we have to take time for ourselves. We have to take time to take care of ourselves so that we can continue to take care of others. So
work-life balance is a myth. So
it is absolutely. It's a pendulum, and I like to tell it's a pendulum, and it's if the pendulum stops, the clock's not running. So
absolutely.
It's always just swinging to one side or the other. It's never in the middle. It's never stops.
We're all also in the same spot. So we all are I think people are being more empathetic and taking a moment. There's that campaign, In Her Shoes, but in someone else's shoes. I don't think anyone on such a broad scale has ever had to pause and think about someone else in such a consistent and broad fashion. So it's giving a lot more opportunity. Definitely give yourself some grace and start practicing work-life harmony, whatever that harmony is for you. Just make sure that you take
AirPods with noise cancellation.
Thank you for that tip, by the way. It was life-changing, so I greatly appreciate it.
You're welcome. All right, Dominique, thank you so much for being with us today. This has been a wonderful, wonderful conversation. Everybody who tuned in, we appreciate you so much. And we just are so appreciative of the time that you have invested in yourself and being with us at the Massachusetts Conference for Women. We have Building Your Brand on LinkedIn with Amanda Healy coming up at the same time, same place on Monday. And we hope that you will come back and join us. And then don't forget that you have until December 18th to take advantage of all of the content from the conference on demand in 6 Connects. So please build some time in over the next week to watch all of the incredible, incredible breakout sessions and Q&As. And we will see you on Monday. So bye, everybody.
Thank you for having me.